Olivia. Welcome, Tara. Welcome, Shushen. Welcome, Noah. Welcome, Lily. Welcome, Anna. Welcome, Isabel. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in about a minute, but we'll just have folks all settle in. It's good to see you all. I hope you are doing well on this slushy Monday for those of us who are in Minneapolis / St. Paul. We're going to take just about another minute waiting for folks, welcoming folks in, and then we'll get started with today's panel. Welcome, Samantha. Okay. Well, with that, why don't we go ahead and get things started? I have already started by welcoming everyone, but hi, everyone. My name is Marcos Cruz. I am one of the career advisors who started in July here at Macalester College, so I'm relatively new to the community, but I'm really excited to be chatting with you all and also hosting this really awesome panel. So predominantly, I get the chance to work with the fine arts and humanities, and I'm really excited to both affirm some things, but also hopefully learn some things from our panelists. And we have some really great folks to talk with you today. So students, if you could please type in your name, your pronouns, your year, and your major into the chat so we can learn a little bit more about all of you. One thing that we want to have happen is for this to turn into a conversation. So we hope that and encourage you to keep your cameras on if you are able, but we also understand if you are not able to turn on your camera and you need to turn it off at any point. We're going to be recording this event and posting it to the Career Exploration website. So just as a heads up there. And throughout the event, please feel free to put your questions into the panel, into the chat, or use the raise hand feature under the reactions. We'll kick things off with panelist intros. So please, students, do add that information into the chat around names, pronouns, years, and major. And then panelists, I will ask the first question here, which will be around how you've gotten into this sector industry, what kind of brought you into the roles that you're in. So panelists, don't feel like you have to answer every single question. Jump in whenever you feel like you have something to contribute. So why don't you just give us a big general intro about who you are, pronouns if you feel comfortable, and then tell us a little bit about some of the roles that you've had with us. So why don't we kick things off with Catherine? You were in first, so I'm going to pick on you.
Okay. I'm Catherine Brethheim. I use she, her pronouns. I graduated from Macalester in 2015, and I'm a graphic designer for an agency called 10,000 Design, which is part of Cole McVoy, which is kind of this integrated advertising agency in Minneapolis. And I kind of got to graphic design very circuitously. I studied geography and art at Mac.
Looks like we had a little bit of a freeze on Catherine. I'll see if, oh, there you go. We lost you for just a second. You're good.
Okay, I'm not sure when I cut out, but I studied geography and art at Mac and really loved graphic design sort of as part of geography. And that's what led me to where I am now. And I mainly do sort of brand identity design in my current work for a variety of clients, from food things to agriculture to animal health to banks. So kind of covers a lot of ground there.
Amazing. We're going to go in order of joining the call. So Sam, I believe you're next.
All right. Hi, I'm Sam Baker. I use she, her pronouns. I was a member of the class of 2013. And I now work as a radio journalist, freelancer, but I primarily work for Deutsche Welle, which is Germany's international broadcaster. I also do some work for the BBC for their science program, Crowd Science, and then some other freelance projects as they come up. But mainly I host a weekly environmental radio show for Deutsche Welle. And at Mac, I studied art history and environmental studies, which don't seem related, but have been helpful in my career. So That's where I started, and then kind of went through communications for about 5 years before getting into journalism.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Takara, I believe you're next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Takara Stark. I'm currently what they call a global strategist in marketing and communications at 3M. Prior to that, I did a lot of work in nonprofits, in particular higher ed, most recently at St. Catherine University. And before that, I spent about a decade in agency doing a wide range of campaigns, everything from direct community engagement, where we were setting up community groups to do advocacy work, to brand campaigns, to influencer campaigns, and kind of everything in between, along with some brand work and other things. While I was at Macalester back in, I graduated in 2004, which seems like a really long time ago. But I saw a dorm room on the back of someone's photo. So it was a nice little flashback. But I majored in what was then communication and media studies and classical history, which were actually, turns out to be a really great pair for this work.
Julia, we'd love to hear from you next.
Sure, great. Julia, use she, her pronouns. I'm class of 2000. Maybe I'm the oldest one here. But I am coming from the world of advertising. I'm a freelance creative director and art director, studied English psychology with a minor in art history, and literally graduated with no idea that this job even existed. My dad's an English professor. I thought maybe I'll become a psychiatrist. I had no idea. So it felt like part of being here today was just a chance to like help show that there's so many jobs out there related to your interests. Like my goal was basically to find a career that could let me take interest in poetry, art, communication, making the world a better place, and wrap that all into one thing. And it's really strange to try to find that in something like the advertising side of media and communication, because advertising can be like, yeah, we sell stuff to people, but you can also be a powerful voice in the media and have a say in like how people view things, drawing attention to world issues. So it seemed like when we graduated, there was a moment where they said, you have to take a vow to make the world a better place. And so going into advertising, I kind of had to think hard about how to put that lens on things, but it feels like whatever you go into, you'll probably bring your Macalester lens of like, how can I bring my voice to this? How can I have my own point of view and make the world a little bit better?
Love that. And Micah, round out our intros before we get started with some questions.
Hi, folks. My name is Micah Minima. I am class of 2002. It's great to be here with you. I am the director of institutional giving at the Ordway Center for the Performing Arts in St. Paul. I started in political organizing, environmental causes out of college, and then transitioned into arts administration about 15 years ago. I think for me, I grew up in an arts-rich environment. I played music. I became empowered because of the arts. And I was able to parlay that into a career in administration and specifically fundraising. So I'm glad I did. I love the arts. And again, it's good to be with you guys.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves. And so students, I'm going to invite you to start throwing questions into the chat, and we'll elevate those in between the ones that we have prepared. So today's panel is titled Curious About Careers, and specifically looking predominantly at communications, media, and arts. And so the first question I have for you, and I actually will ask all of you to respond to this, is how did you decide this was the area, industry, or discipline that you were interested in pursuing? And if you didn't decide that, I also would love to hear that, because that'd be an interesting conversation as well. So whoever would like to go first.
I can go first, Marcos. I actually started out Macalester as a pre-med student. I thought I'd be a hematologist and do AIDS research. But after meeting with career counseling and looking at that path, I decided it was really not for me. And so started kind of looking around at what other interests I had. I'd been on the school paper and yearbook and other things in high school, had really loved English. And so communication seemed like a good fit, and that there were a wide range of career options. So I switched in my sophomore year. But what really solidified it was actually my senior year. I took a public relations class. And I remember the professor getting up and saying, this is all about building relationships. And that was what set it off for me of it. Yes, there's some parts of advertising and marketing in there, but building relationships sounded perfect for what I liked to do and making those connections with people. And then I had a chance to have a guest speaker come in who talked about working at an agency and specifically talked about some of the positive work, especially when you work in healthcare or education and other things where you're actually working to help patient lives and other things. And so I took my career down that path and have really loved it. To one of the other points, Julia, is that how do you make your mark in the world, especially in this field where it's can feel like it's always negative. There's a ton of really great and wonderful work happening in the nonprofit areas, in healthcare, in environmental studies. So there's a lot of movement, and especially to bring diverse voices. It's one of the areas that is always in demand of how are we really representing the world in an accurate way. And so it's a great way to come in and have a voice in a wonderful way. I think about the radio broadcast and how much that really probably does have an influence because there's so much happening even in that space around radio and podcasts and other things. So that was how I found my path into this field.
I'll jump in. I think I'd focus on why I'm still here. So I had a conversation with a colleague recently who told me that she had to get out of the arts, and so she moved to the zoo. And I looked at her and I thought, well, I thought fundraising itself was just challenging. I thought the work of being in a nonprofit was challenging. And so why is one field different than the other? Is there something unique about the arts specifically? And the truth is, there is a challenge with arts administration that is unique to our field. And part of it is we have to beg, borrow, and steal for every nickel and to keep our programs afloat. And there's just a certain amount of commitment that you need to the empowering aspect of the arts in order to stick. You can jump into the field and you can be inspired to become an arts administrator and work at it a couple of years, but to do it year after year after year has to be integral to your soul. It has to be what you are truly called to do, because it is a very challenging field. And for me, what you mentioned in terms of ensuring diverse voices and making our community a little bit more inclusive is what drives me at the Ordway. I believe that when you make the arts a little bit more inclusive, you make the community a little bit more open and diverse and inclusive. And so I'm very committed to this work, and I'm very passionate about it. And that's why I'm still here. Otherwise, it's not a field for those that are just interested because, you know, it's fun to be in the arts. To really make a career out of it, it has to be something you are deeply committed to.
I'll go next. That was great. I put kind of a strange lens on it. I was like trying to figure out how I wanted to spend my days and like who you'd be spending them with. If your career is something that lasts, 20, 30, 40 years, the people that you're around are going to be a huge part of what makes your day-to-day life. And so for me, working in advertising has been a way to collaborate with filmmakers. I got to make a piece with Cary Fukunaga right after he made Sin Nombre, work with photographer Ryan McGinley on some projects, collaborate with music composers. My day-to-day as a creative, like art directors partner with writers. And so you're in a room with somebody coming up with ideas all day. So you have this collaborative partnership moment happening. Entrepreneurs, like I've been approached by entrepreneurs to work on their startup ideas and projects. And I spend half the year working at Apple around people who are doing some interesting thinking there. I think, I didn't really know this existed, but once I did, and you could start to think about what those days would be like, spending time with a notebook, your brain, and collaborators was the thing that pushed it over the line for me and made it feel like a career that could work. But I think the other thing too would be, I think I mentioned this before too, just combining the stuff you're interested in. Like if you're interested in poetry and art and all these different things and have no idea how they're going to come together, I think there's stuff in this field that lets you combine all your interests. And that was really important for me as well, to keep it interesting.
I kind of have some overlap with that, with what Julia said. I think I always loved being creative, but I didn't necessarily feel artistic. I have a very mathy brain. And so graphic design allows me to sort of combine those two things. And then I've just always been interested in so many different fields, and it was hard for me to narrow down what my major was at Mac or what I wanted to do afterwards. And so working at an agency where you're working on clients from lots of different industries keeps sort of my interest going, and I get to learn about different businesses while applying graphic design to all those projects. So yeah, it's kind of allows me to be creative, to be analytical and strategic, and to continue sort of learning about a lot of stuff all at once.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both Julia and Catherine. I think that was something that got me into journalism, just wanting to keep learning about things every day, and loving interviewing people and asking them questions that you wouldn't normally in conversation maybe be appropriate to ask them about whatever they do or they're passionate about. And I actually came to Mac wanting to do international journalism, and was drawn by the amazing international studies program there, but got sidelined and interested in other things while I was there. But that all, helped funnel into my career and just give me other interests that I could build upon to be a journalist and focus what type of journalism I was going to do later on, even though I didn't really realize it at the time. But yeah, I think it's just one of these jobs where you get to keep learning in some ways, and you get to have that wonder of almost being a student and exploring new things and new topics, which I love.
Pulled out some things from what you all said around like the wonder of being and learning from a bunch of different places and corporations. One of the things that stood out to me, I think, with what Julia said around a notebook, a brain, and collaborators, being able to diversify voices and elevating the arts being some of the key drivers of what you all did. And I just wanted to say that all of that is amazing, but not as great as the selective hearing point that Takara brought up around meeting with your career exploration advisor. So I just wanted to elevate that real quick. With that, before we go into Lily's question, why don't I have 2 or 3 of you talk a little bit about how you think a liberal arts education sets someone up for a career in this field? It sounds like you all took diverse paths, and so I imagine the liberal arts education had a key or had a component of that.
I can jump in on this one. I was just talking about it a little bit, but so I studied environmental studies and art history. I now am an environmental journalist, and never planned to be, but actually got my current job thanks to that experience, both learning at Mac and then working in environmental nonprofits afterwards. And I think particularly in journalism, but I think in other parts of communications and media too, just having a varied knowledge is very important coming to a job, that you know more than one path. And of course, Mac offers that, and any liberal arts curriculum offers that. And I think it's such a benefit, and it allows you to move around within organizations too, when you maybe need to change it up a little bit. So I've really appreciated that.
I would add, oh, sorry, Julia. One of the great things about liberal arts is the diversity of things you get exposed to and how it teaches you to be, we talk about it as critical thinking is always the buzzword, but I think it teaches you to be curious. And that's really what you need in this field. As you were talking, Catherine, about just learning about all these different businesses, and no matter which area of communications or you go into, there's always something new to learn and to stay up on the trends and what's happening. Or even in the arts, you have to keep up what's happening in the field and fundraising and those types of things. And so that just helps build that skill set in and makes it really easy to tap into those to be really successful and to keep growing. Because if you don't have a natural curiosity, it's really hard to then engage with all these new people and want to learn about them.
Julia, did you want to weigh in?
That's beautiful. I think, Takara, you just said it beautifully. I would just add, like, the pillar of multiculturalism was important, like at a liberal arts college where you're exposed to multiple voices, and the pushing against like what's in the canon and like what we should be studying and looking at. I feel like the lens that Macalester put on every single subject was helpful to enter the world and do that and in the place you work, and do that with the people you work with, do that with the voices that are being brought to the table. And that lens that Macalester gives you, whatever department you're in, if it's international studies or, drama, whatever you're studying in the arts or non-arts field, that lens is, I think, going to help you stand out and ask the right questions and put the right lens on your career.
Thank you all for sharing that. So first question from a student comes from Lily. Lily asks, what was your first job out of college? How did that prepare you for the current job that you're in? And so I'll have three of you respond to this one.
I think mine was probably the most random. I worked at Core Power Yoga teaching yoga and workout classes and managing studios for a few years. And I don't even know if I can articulate how that prepared me for now. I think part of it is like talking with clients and thinking about marketing and all that. But I think it pushed me to think about how I would sort of like wrap up my liberal arts education and sort of these disparate jobs that I had when I was going into interviews, to be able to articulate how that could be relevant to graphic design, just like having, high-paced deadlines or a large volume of projects. A lot of the designers, actually, I think all the designers at my company come from an art school background. So sort of being able to talk about how my liberal arts degree and sort of a random job would be helpful in this role was, I think, a good practice to take doing informational interviews and actual interviews. Yeah.
I'll go, I guess. My first job was at an advertising agency. I was a project manager, and I knew that I wasn't ready to enter the creative department because I had no portfolio and didn't even really know what the steps would be to do that. And so I had a strategy of working at the lowest paying, like strangest bottom level job, and like working my way up and taking classes at night. So I studied in ad school. I went to 2 different ad schools, kind of on the side of working in advertising. But my theory was that I didn't know enough about how ad agencies worked and the structure and what made somebody great. And so I just said, if I go there for 1 year and just take this job, get paid to learn, there's maybe a strategy in that. I didn't feel like I walked out of Macalester as like some cookie cutter, like communications major who could walk in and take some fancy job. Like I felt really unclear about how it all worked. And so wanted to just embed in the industry and see what the next steps would be and see if I actually wanted to take the steps to do what it would take to become a creative in advertising, which is a commitment of two years of school beyond your 4 years. So I kind of wanted to like step in and see what it was like before fully agreeing to jump in. And then before that, actually in St. Paul, I had a job at an ad agency from a temp place I went to. I literally needed to pay my rent for the rest of the summer after I graduated. And I was like, I'll go to a temp agency. And this guy randomly put me into an ad agency, which is how I found out they even existed. So I feel like any small step you take, even if it's like the crappiest first job, can lead to good stuff. And maybe at the worst, it just shows you what you don't want to do. But the little steps in the beginning can feel small, but that's okay.
I love that, Julia, and it's a perfect segue into our next conversation. So if you want to talk about your first jobs, throw them into the chat. But it looks like quite a few of you went on to grad school in making that decision. And so for those of you who went, this question's from Olivia. Did you find grad school to be important to getting to where you are now?
I can start with that one. I would say yes and no. I have both a master's and a doctorate when I went to get my master's, I had 2 years in at an agency at that point, and truly asked a lot of my colleagues. Some of them had masters in comms, some of them had MBAs and degrees in other things. And they were all very frank and said, if you want to stay in agency, you know, a master's at this point won't make a difference for you because you've already got a couple years of an experience, and they kind of balance out the experience versus degree. And they said, if you'd wanted to do that, we would have said, do it right after college. But they kind of balance out. But I did look at like where I wanted to go post agency. I didn't think it was going to be my entire life. And I thought about moving into potentially nonprofit and nonprofit leadership. I kind of have a vision of being an executive director at some point, although I've seen the inside workings of that and might have changed my mind. But when I looked at what those folks did, most of them had a doctorate of some level. And so I knew that I probably need to start working on that path if I wanted to keep going. And so as I looked at master's programs, I knew I didn't want an MBA. That just wasn't of interest to me. And I really looked around for something that was different. That's how I found the master's in org leadership at St. Kate's, and ended up taking that and really loved it, loved how they brought different subjects together. And I've actually used it a lot in my career. I think that helped move me along faster as I got a little bit higher up. And then I did my doctorate again because I wanted to have that door open for going into nonprofit work. That has helped me in some cases, especially as I went into higher ed. Those with higher education really like to have people understand what it means to have an advanced degree. So it worked really well there. In all honesty, 3M is scientists. A lot of them have masters and doctorates, and so they really value it. So the organizations I've picked have valued it. But I would say as I look at colleagues who have also moved up and become vice presidents or creative directors or other things, they've gone different paths and not all of them have advanced degrees. So I think it really kind of depends on which path you want to go through and what your industry of interest asks for and values.
So as I mentioned, switched careers a few years ago, and I found getting a master's at that point a really good decision. Because I had worked in communications for 5 years and was looking to pivot, but hadn't worked in journalism yet, I found it did open a lot of doors. However, I would say if you're interested in journalism and want to do it right out of Mac and are willing to go to a local outlet, a smaller newspaper or radio station, I think you can definitely make it without the master's degree too. I think it just can propel your steps into journalism, depending on what type of journalism you want to do too. If you want to work internationally, it can be helpful, I think, but definitely not essential.
Other thoughts on this question?
I'll just say from an advertising lens, like the typical path is to go to an ad school for 2 years. So if you end up becoming a creative in advertising, you go to a portfolio school, which teaches you like how to write, how to think, how to come up with concepts. And it's very specific. You might study design. You could be a writer and go that side, or you could be an art director and go that way. But the field is also changing really quickly, and it feels like the new generation is breaking rules in good ways, and kind of they're more creators. So if you're a creator in any sense, there's roles for you too, and you might not have to take the traditional ad school path.
Similar to that, I think for like graphic design specifically, everyone I work with had a BFA in graphic design. And since that is not an option at Macalester, ultimately it comes down to your portfolio. I got a master's in graphic and web design because I wanted to develop a portfolio in kind of a structured setting. But you don't need a master's per se to develop that portfolio work.
Thank you all for sharing those pieces. So sorry that we're going to jump timelines a little bit with going on the grad school side, but I'd actually like to take you all back to undergrad here for just a second and ask you, if you were to do this trajectory again, is there anything you wished you would have known while you were in undergrad and that you could push push that advice onto students if they're interested in some of the things that you've been able to do. Micah, if I could start with you so that we can hear from you in that space, and then I'll have two other folks speak on that as well. That'd be great.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Looking back on it, I think I wish I would have realized how much of a world existed outside the McAllister bubble. I definitely ventured out and experienced things in Minneapolis. I did not come to appreciate just how rich the art scene is of the Twin Cities until I started to work in it. And had I realized it earlier, I would have had a lot more experiences to remember. And also, it is helpful as you enter the field to have a sense of the landscape and to know what drives you, what you love. If it's literature, there are some amazing literary organizations. If it is media, there are some phenomenal community media organizations. So the more that you experience that as a student, the more likely it is you'll be able to demonstrate to a potential hirer for your internship program or maybe that first job that you are really committed to this work and that you're really interested in it because you know what's playing at Penumbra this week or whatever the case is. You've experienced it and you've shown that it fuels you. And so I think if I had known back then, I would have been going to a lot more shows and a lot more readings.
Other thoughts? I saw some like visceral reactions to the question, so it was like, oof. And I'd love to hear some of your reflections.
I mean, it made me laugh because if I could go back now, I would just take all the weirdest, most amazing classes. Like astronomy has nothing to do with my day-to-day life. And that made me so happy that I took that. Neuroscience was amazing. I wish I'd taken more econ classes. I would just say like become an interesting human and take some of the out there classes that don't fit your pathway. Feels like so many of the jobs that are out there are like still being created even. So becoming an interesting human and like studying the diverse array of stuff that you possibly can. It seems like, I know it's good to be focused, but don't not take the weirdo oddball, like amazing classes that are there like this. It's going to feed into what you do somehow. I swear it will come back. I studied, my honors thesis was on the Bloomsbury group, that group that of artists that lived outside of London, and they went there to escape industrialization. And I was asked to curate art for this hotel in New Orleans. And it was all inspired by the Bloomsbury group. They literally sent me this proposal and I was like, oh my God, I did my honors thesis on this. This is crazy. So the crazy classes you take will come around somehow, I promise. And they will feed you later in life in some way, career-wise or not, but don't not take those, I think.
I would build on what both Julia and Micah said of try those new things. Exactly. Julia, I had so many of those similar experiences, so I totally support that. And Micah, I would say the same thing. I ended up working both on campus and off campus while I was going to Mac. And so I worked so much that I didn't necessarily take advantage of everything I should have. But with that too, I would build on get an internship, whatever way, shape, or form that comes in. It does not have to be formal. I did not start doing internships until after my senior year. And I was probably 2 to 3 years behind a lot of other recent grads in doing that. And you can truly do it in any way, shape, or form, even if you're just volunteering for a month or someplace, which is also a really great way to sample if you want to do something. Like to your point, Julie, you didn't know what it was going to be like. And once I did some of that volunteering and other things, it really helped me figure out which path I wanted and which path I really didn't want as well. And so I think any chance you can, whether you have a family friend who has a business and you just want to hang out, and even asking to job shadow is really helpful. I know that everyone seems really busy. People are always willing to say yes. You'd be shocked at how many people will say yes if you just say, can I talk to you over coffee about your job? Can I job shadow you? Can you just tell me about this? Would you make a connection? I get asked all the time. I say yes every time because I know how important it is. And I remember everyone who said yes to me. So just make the ask. Those would be my 2 pieces of advice on top of Micah and Julia's.
Takara, you couldn't have set up my segue better even if I had planned it. So I appreciate you for this one. Isabel writes, how can a student stand out when applying to internships at large media agencies? I'm going to broaden that just a little bit for all of you to kind of weigh in on if you're feeling interested. Two or three folks to weigh in on, excuse me, but like, what makes students stand out when you are thinking about those folks who are newly coming into your organizations? What do you look for in those moments?
The others don't mind, I'll start simply because I ran an internship program at one of my agencies. And I would say the thing that stood out for us when we were looking is folks are going to come in with a lot of the same skills. You have the degree, you were taking the classes and the things. We're looking for, to Micah's point, interest and passion. Like, what do you know? Do you really want to do this? And your personality. One of the things that I was always told when I was working in agency is there's 1,001 agencies out here. What we really sell is ourselves, our passions, our talents, our interests. And so if you can come in and show us who your personality is, that's going to stand out, and showing us what your interests are makes you stand out, and shows also that you're going to bring that to the work, because that's really what you need, is a passion, some interest in it, some creativity, and to willing to be out of the box a little bit. So whether that's, I mean, I had someone submit a cover letter once where they edited our job posting, which you would think would not be the way to go, but they had
Whoa.
a really good sense of humor about it,
Love
right?
that.
And to show us like how they would bring their creative writing chops to it. It was a risk, and they knew it, and they even said, I'm taking this risk, but either you're going to love it or going to hate it. And it's those types of things. Or I had a potential intern actually prepare a PowerPoint of their skills, and they were bringing in skiing experience and other things. And again, not what we expected, way over prepared, but really showed like what they would bring to the job, of how they would prepare, how they think about their experience, how they might put it together. So.
I'd add, the first question I ask when I'm hiring somebody is, what do you know about my organization? So ideally it goes beyond research. It goes beyond what you can Google and figure out online, and it goes to a personal story. Like, here is what I know about your organization. Here's what I've experienced. Here's why I care. You can research things. If you're applying to, let's say it's an arts organization, you can look at their website, you can talk to somebody in the community and figure out what their presence is. But the more personal you can make that, here's what I know, here's what I've experienced, the more likely it is you'll stand out.
One more
I was
thought? Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking back to my first job after Mac, actually, and having a really great conversation with that executive director about, it was about Indigenous communities in Alaska, and it was a sustainable fishing group that I ended up working for a few years after that. But we had a long conversation about environmental history from my time at Mac. And I think being able to turn those things that you've learned and into conversations and ways to connect with people is really important once you get on the phone with them, or even if you kind of in your cover letter. And then also with that job, just on a side note, I had worked in the slide library at Mac. I don't know if that even still exists, but I literally, for like 2 or 3 years of my time at Mac, I took old slides and digitized them. And this first job was building a photo database. So because I knew Photoshop from this random student job, it also got me in the door. So I think thinking about those practical things, and then also, the more critical thinking things that you learn at Mac, don't underestimate the little skills that you've picked up too.
Sounds like Noah knows all about that over there. So yeah. Okay. Let's do, Tara asks, I think we covered this, Takara, a little bit when you talked about someone critiqued a job description, but questions around like what makes a cover letter really stand out to you, or some advice you have maybe throughout the hiring process outside of like what you maybe look for in an intern. Is there other thoughts we can add there?
Well, I put it in the chat, but the question that Micah asked, I've been asked in every job interview. And it's a standard. So I would say always prepare for it there. I would say the first thing I look for in a cover letter is, did you do a cover letter? Even if one isn't asked for, do one. It is your chance to really do that of why do you even want this job and to stand out. So many companies use scanning tools and other things to look at your resume, and they're looking for keywords, and you can do all the formulas. But if yours is one of the 10 that gets through and I'm looking through and I have to try and pick who I want to talk to, I'm going to look for that cover letter and what stood out about them versus somebody else. So really it's your chance to have that first part of the conversation. And then the other thing I would say is, if you're going into communications, PR, advertising, other areas in general, but in particular this field, proof it, have somebody else proof it. This is a field that is about attention to detail. If we're publishing an article, sending out a news release, printing a brochure, making a video, those types of errors are huge. And yes, one or two will slip by and we will let that go. But if you spell the company's name wrong, if you didn't use proper grammar, we're going to look at that and be like, that's training we have to do that we just don't have time to do. And we will move along to the other person. Those are the key things that always stand out to us. But oftentimes it's those folks who bother to do a cover letter. And a lot of them put personal stories in of how they had a connection to the at St. Kate's. It was a lot of times it was whose mom or sister or aunt came to St. Kate's and like walking on the campus. So they knew something about the place and it had a personal connection. Or if they were switching fields, why this is completely different from what you might see in their resume. And a couple of those are really what opened the door. And I hired those people because they could show it and they knew how to translate their skills and made me want to talk to them. That was a key part of some of those letters.
Okay, moving into the next question I would ask is, I think particularly with the creative sector, there can be times when you often have to dig a little bit deep for those muses or dig a little bit deeper for inspiration or moments where you're to stay motivated. And I think like the way that the world is changing, the way work is changing in conversations now is a part of that. So I'd be curious to ask whoever's interested in sharing a little bit about who or what inspires you and what keeps you motivated as you are thinking about the way like engaging with sometimes heavy topics of the world, heavy topics that maybe you're tackling within the creative space, but then also like wanting to elevate what was said earlier around elevating folks' voices and tackling different topics. So yes, who or what inspires you and what keeps you motivated?
I would love to answer that one. I get really motivated by wanting to solve problems, like whether it's in like a Larry David way where you're opening packaging and it sucks to open packaging, or you see like, wow, this government designed app is the worst thing that's ever been made in the universe. And why is it so hard to like, how do you make donating money to like a guy standing on the corner with a sign easier? Like just any part of life that is hard or has a stress point or could be solved with creative thinking. Like, how do we get half the city of Portland to ride their bikes instead of driving? Like just any kind of thing that could make the world better design or better thinking. And it could be an artful decision. Art is a beautiful part of the process, but problem solving, I guess, keeps me interested. I feel like I'm doing it every single day. Everything I look at, everywhere I go, everything I read, I'm just like, why are these all like a bunch of white people talking about this? Why is this moment here? So like this could have an art moment here. Why don't we put art in more places in the world? Just any ways to problem solve under the guise of like making the world a better place keeps me inspired. Literally, I could be in like a nursing home or in a grocery store at the DMV, and my brain is just spinning on that stuff. And it keeps me, I think it's related to my job. Like advertising has a lot of creative problem solving. You're literally like given a budget and a box and you have to come up with an idea within that. But I think the best thing about creativity is that little boundary around you makes your problem solving better. It's like having deadlines and rules and regulations makes your brain go. So I love that.
Well, I'll jump in. I mentioned earlier on the difficulties of arts administration. There are tremendous joys too. So I do want to make that clear. And one of the things that's inspired me recently was the Ordway opened its doors to school children for the first time in 2 years. It was last Friday, and I had a chance to be in the hall and watch the school children come in and experience the arts for the first time in years. And at the it was Danu, a presentation from the Irish group Danu, and there was a homeschool there, and it was a family of a mother and two kids who were paraplegic, and they sat in the back of the hall, and the mother got her child onto her lap, and I watched them experience this joyful moment for an hour and a half. I'm getting a little emotional, but knowing that that was a break in their day, that was a memory that they'll have. That's the power of the arts, and that's what gets you through the difficult pieces of the job, is because you are really changing people's lives.
One or two more. What inspires you? What keeps you motivated?
I'll hop
I
in.
think, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, of course, working in radio, listeners are a massive inspiration. And when we actually hear back from them, it really keeps me going. I did a program earlier this year, or actually last year, 2021, about menstruation from like a science perspective. And we got, sorry, there's this ambulance. We got an email from like a 6-year-old guy who said, "This is the most informative program I've heard in a long time. It should be required listening for everyone." And those little emails and things really keep me going.
For me, I think studying abroad and that open, did I freeze up?
You're good. Keep going.
Okay. I had the opportunity to be really introduced to lots of different design disciplines and out in the wild in Copenhagen. That was really inspiring. And I got to go back. I graduated for a couple of years. And widen my worldview, understand the possibilities for society and how people care for each other, and design plays a role in some of that. So any opportunity you can to experience other places is, I think, will continue to fuel that inspiration.
Amazing. Thank you all for sharing that. I think we have time for 2 more questions. So the last one that I will kind of like ask as a broader term before we do like a summary or a wrap up is, this is a chance for you to also just indict me on my performance. So what question do you wish that we would have asked you so that we could use this space to address a really important topic for the work that you do?
I guess why this field? I actually was talking with someone about that recently, and it's a topic I'm really passionate about, especially as a woman of color. There's a lot of talk about in marketing, communications, advertising, the lack of diversity in this field and why that is. There's a lot of systemic issues, but one of the big issues is there's no pipeline. This is not a field that BIPOC folks are necessarily encouraged to go into. And if you don't know someone in the field or don't get exposed somehow, you don't get told about it and you have no idea what it is. And, it's also one of those fields that a lot of people just assume, oh, you're an English major or history major. Like, why would you pick those degrees? You're never going to find a job. We are the most in demand in this field imaginable. Folks love to hire liberal arts majors in these fields because of our thinking, because of our broadness, the interest that we bring. But we really need to help build that pipeline. And I think the other part is there actually is really good career paths, and you can make a lot of money if you really want to, or you don't have to. You have the option to do amazing, incredible work in nonprofits or for free, or if you want to work at a big conglomerate or a big corporation like Target and other things, like you can pick and choose, and you can even mix and match those. however you want. Especially if you set up your own business or you want to freelance, you can put them together. But I think you just heard some examples. At the end of the day, there's so much work where you get to see the end result. You get to see that student or that young child have that experience. You get to see a patient who's healing from the product that you helped promote. You get to see a community come together and experience. I worked on the Union Depot in St. Paul. To have something open in a community that brings people together again is wonderful. There's so many different ways that you can take this career and shape it and make it your own. And I think it's just one that's just so under talked about and undervalued. And now it's shifting into everyone just wants to be an influencer or a TikTok. But that's great. But that is 2% of what's really happening in this field. And there's so much opportunity. And I just wish more folks even had it on their consideration set. You can tell I'm passionate about it.
Thank you for that, Takara. Yeah, I love that answer. Other questions that we should have tackled in this space? Given it the comfortable silence or uncomfortable silence, whatever that has to look like. Enough from having done a couple virtual presentations. Okay, so why don't we do this? I'm gonna talk for just a little bit, which will allow our panelists to put their their contact information if they're interested, in case you all want to continue the conversations here individually. Students, just so that you're aware, there is a short survey that is listed, and Carrie kind of has dropped it here into the chat, and you're more than able to go in there and fill out and let us know how this panel went. If you have thoughts, I want to highlight things that went well, thoughts that you thought could go better. If they could have hired a better looking host for it, like, please let everybody know so that we can try to make those changes for you in the future. The last question that I think I want to leave you all with is just kind of give us your best piece of advice kind of moving forward. I know you've already given us a lot, but what's one thing that you haven't yet got a chance to share with us that is a good piece of advice moving forward? And then we'll probably just hang out for a few extra minutes so the call can wrap up. So if you're feeling comfortable, panelists, I'm going to have you all respond to this, but just let us know what's one piece of advice you have for the group.
I have a random one. I think maybe this doesn't apply if you're a doctor, but if you're in the creative arts, media arts realm, I think there's something nice about doing things your own way. Like when you're starting out and you don't know all the rules and you don't know how everything's supposed to go, I think there's like a freedom and a beauty to that, like making up a pathway that makes sense to you. Like the story of the person who rewrote the job posting, like do things on your own terms a bit, find ways into it that make sense to you. I think there's a good freedom, and I think sometimes it's how the best stuff gets done. Why isn't there a podcast about this? Well, I don't know, just the freedom to go make something like that and do it on your own terms. And maybe it's not the best podcast, but then the second time you do it, it's going to be even better. There's this idea that we have to be great at something right away, and it's just not always possible.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Like, you don't have to be an expert at what you want to do. I feel like going into the job interviewing process, I felt nervous that I wasn't a professional photo retoucher and an illustrator and could do like every task within the design industry. So I think it's just important to remember you don't have to be an expert, and sort of expressing your curiosity will go a long way because you get to learn so much on the job. And like making that known that you're really excited to do that can be impactful.
I would say in terms of journalism, just putting yourself out there and pitching and not taking it personally if you can. It feels like a lot, but you just have to keep going and having ideas and reaching out to people and think of different ways that you could get involved with things. Like one thing that was massively instrumental for my work in radio was working on a independent podcast as like a part-time producer while I was in grad school, but it wasn't a formal internship. It wasn't a, big media house. So I think thinking of different opportunities like that can get you a long way.
I recently gave this advice to a high schooler who was trying to set goals. And I said, careers aren't about picking for a lifetime anymore. It used to be that like, if you wanted to be a teacher, that's what you were going to be for life. That's not the way the world works. And I think it's really easy to get overwhelmed with picking your major and what my career is going to be. Know that people, I think the average now is change careers 5 to 7 times in their lifetime, and that number keeps going up. And so I always say, think about what you just want to do for the next 3 to 5 years and explore. And if you do it for 20, great, you're one of the lucky ones. And if you change it, you're totally normal. Interests will change, opportunities will change. As Julia pointed out, every industry keeps changing too. I mean, jobs that didn't exist even 5 years ago are huge now. And that's going to keep happening too. And so don't get locked into the fear of what am I going to do for the next 20 years? Just think about what sounds fun and exciting for the next 3 to 5 and go for it. You'll find either it's your path or you'll find a whole new path that's just as exciting and interesting.
I think that was everyone. I hope so. Okay, I hope so. Well, with that, we are very close, a minute to go to 12:30. I will stick around in the space and invite anyone else to stick around for a few minutes in case you want to ask your question a little bit more intimately. But can we please give a big round of applause silently or just via the chat or do one of these via video for the panelists who came and chatted with us. So thank you all so much for your time today. Really appreciate your insights. And look forward to hopefully continuing these connections and continuing these conversations because it's really important. So at this time, I will dismiss everybody and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, but I will stick around in case more questions want to be asked.